Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com, and this is just a video to kind of conceptually understand what's going on in the back end. I've done videos where I kind of went over the whole picture, front end and back end, but this one's going to be focusing more on the back end. So I'm not going to talk as much about the browser and the browser's role. So we're just going to kind of assume that someone from somewhere has sent in a request. Okay, okay, a request that got routed from some DNS. Okay, so basically a DNS server said, "Hey, this IP address somewhere is the server that is basically the computer that holds the website." And basically, just kind of to show you what happens in that computer, there is just draw another box. There's different types of software in that computer. The first piece is the web server. Okay, and this could be generally Apache on many servers, Nginx. These are sort of the main pieces of software that do this. That basically they think of them as traffic controllers. So requests for different websites are going into this one computer, and this one computer has lots of websites. The traffic controller is going to be Apache or Nginx. In Apache or Nginx, they essentially have all the information on the different websites that are on that computer. Okay, and these are basically the applications. So there might be one application, and each application has its own application server. Basically, it has its own software that then, once the request goes from the web server, so basically we go to Apache and like, "Hey Apache, I'm looking for xyz.com." It's then going to route it over to the xyz.com application, which then has its own sort of server software that says, okay, well, this part of xyz.com's here, this part of xyz.com's here, this is how we build the website. And that could be something like, let's say, I'll give you a couple different ones, like Ruby on Rails could be sort of the application framework that runs that one. You know, it could be like something like, it could be using JavaScript and be using something like Node, which Node generally you're using something with like Express, Koa. These are different frameworks on Node to do sort of backend servers. Koa or Full TS, those are sort of the main ones. And there is, I'll do a couple small ones. So again, these are different websites. So this would be abc.com. Then over here is def.com. And maybe def.com's backend is written in Python. So it probably uses something like Django as its framework to do its backend stuff. Okay. And basically these backend frameworks, Ruby on Rails, Node, Express, Koa, Full TS, Python, Django. Well, Django's the framework, Python's the language. But what they do is that they're going to be the air traffic controller for the application. So this Apache said, okay, well, you want to go to def.com, I'm going to send you over here. But then if I say, hey, I want to go to def.com / information, then it's going to be Django that directs it from there. Okay. And generally when we talk about, and then I'm going to lift these up a little bit so I can put some more text down here. And there's more frameworks. Like every language has its own sort of backend framework. So put that there. Put this here. And generally this framework right here, this backend framework, the application framework, it handles several things. Routing. Okay, routing is again the air traffic controller saying, hey, you're going to this URL, so you're going to abc.com/about. Then let me show you the website that's abc.com/about. That's routing, saying this is the URL, this is where you're going, let me get you back the right information. It handles authentication, so basically if someone logs in, handling verifying that user. Let me just make this smaller. Where are my font tools? Here we go. Let's make it like 8. Okay, so routing, authentication, other things that get handled at the server side is sometimes a rendering. So that means sometimes instead of actually having sort of this pre-built static website, this HTML file that you just kind of send over, the server might actually put it together for you based on different pieces from templates and whatnot, and actually render the website and then deliver it from the server side. And this is where I'll leave it at that. Basically, sometimes the website is actually built from the server. You create these pieces based on what the user requests. It'll piece it together for the user. It'll also handle database connections. Okay, so what's going to happen is that separately, that on that computer there might be a database. Okay, so let's draw some databases. And generally, databases come in 2 flavors. They come in either NoSQL flavor, and when you think NoSQL flavor, probably the most well-known NoSQL server is MongoDB, but there's also DynamoDB from Amazon. There's Scylla, which I've never used, so I don't know really what their deal is. I think it's SCYLA. There we go. So NoSQL databases mean there's like no relationships. So basically, the database doesn't keep track of what pieces of data are related to other pieces of data. The benefit is basically they're just keeping track of text. So you're entering in your information pretty much as pure text, and because of that, it can hold a lot more information in a lot less space. It can pull up that information a little faster. For a small to medium application, you probably wouldn't notice the difference, nor would the difference probably matter all that much. The idea is really for like very large, giant enterprise applications. You know, suddenly having your data in this type might make a difference. I would say the vast majority of databases are relational databases, SQL databases, where the database actually does keep track of this data is related to this data. So if this data gets deleted, delete this data. It keeps track of all those relationships. So those are called SQL databases, and those could be things like MySQL, could be SQLite, could be Postgres SQL, could be MariaDB. These are all different SQL databases. And this is a separate thing than your actual backend application. So these are 2 different things. Here you're storing a bunch of data. So this is just one big database of data. Has its own piece of software that's running on the server or on a separate server. So how does your application, you know, whether it's Ruby, Node, Python, Django, how do they pull in the data? Because they're going to need user data to show your user information on the website. So they need to go pull that from the database. So like if you're using a Mongo for specifically, let's see here, let me just get some shapes. Okay, so there's going to be different tools that are used to kind of connect your application to the database. But again, they're 2 separate things. So generally, when you're talking about like an SQL database, let me make this a bit bigger. Okay, you're talking about an SQL database. You're using what's called an ORM, an object relationship manager. Every different language has different ones, but basically they'll connect you to the SQL database, and they allow you to do everything through that ORM to pull information, add information to that database. Now, see, and then let's make another one of these. Control C, Control V. Good. Now, if we're talking about like a NoSQL database, they generally have their own custom thing. So each one kind of does it. Creates their own plugin for that particular database. So each NoSQL database is very unique to the next one. Let me make this a little bit smaller. So I can all fit on one line. But for like Mongo, which is probably the one, especially if you're working in mainly JavaScript, the one you'll run into the most, what it does is specifically for the Node environment. So if you're working in Node, Mongo has this thing called Mongoose. And Mongoose is basically the connection between your database and your application. So basically Mongoose isn't the database, but basically because you have Mongoose, your application that runs Node, which is very popular nowadays, can then connect to the Mongo database, put information inside of it, and take information out of it. So this kind of acts as like that conduit of information going in and out. So to walk through that whole process, somebody wants to go to abc.com. There goes to some DNS server over here. The DNS server says to go to this computer. This computer has a web server. Says, okay, well, I have all these websites on my server. Apache goes, well, abc.com is over here. So routes that request to the application. The application says, well, you're looking for abc.com/user profile. Well, that user profile requires information on that user to bring up the profile, to render the page. So then it connects to the database using an ORM or Mongoose, let's say. So it connects, pulls the user information, which sends it back to the application server. The application server will then render the web page. Okay, will then render the website with the information from the user, and then send it back. And then that goes back as a response. Shape, arrows. I want arrows. And then that's the response. Like, it then gets sent back to the user who's browsing on their computer. So essentially, the back end of a website, whenever people say they're back-end engineers or they work on the back end, they're basically working on this part of the website. Everything that happens from when the request is received into the web server and getting routed to the application server and then connecting to the database to pull the information from when it gets from generating a response to when that response gets sent. And then the front end would be everything outside of that. Okay, so when the browser asks, so the browser making the request and the browser receiving the response is the front end, and then rendering that response onto the user's screen. So hopefully this makes more sense on what these pieces are and how they relate to each other. Yeah, that was the point of this video, because once you understand what things are doing and why they matter, it makes it a lot easier to learn them, to use them, to build things. So my name is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com. Have a great day and enjoy.